In the second preface to Hegel's Encyclopedia of Logic, he discusses religion in relation to philosophy in a very specific way. He says the concentrated religious attitude that focuses strictly on the heart must make its contrition and mortification into the essential moment of its rebirth. Hegel talks about religion requiring and needing a rebirth. Now, we've heard this language before in another place. In the 3rd chapter of the Gospel of John, a man comes to Jesus by night and asks him what he must do to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus tells him that he must be born again. But here we have a step beyond the religious birth that's spoken of in Christianity. We have a step beyond. We have a philosophical sublation of religion handed to us in the form of a rebirth. Hegel says, the concentrated religious attitude that focuses strictly on the heart must make its contrition and mortification into the essential moment of its rebirth. Religion must concentrate and focus on a rebirth. But it must at the same time recollect that it is dealing with the heart of a spirit, and that the spirit is appointed as the power over the heart, and it can only be this power insofar as it is itself born again. Hegel is not here referring to an actual spirit. He's not referring to some mysterious phantom. Neither is he referring to a mysticism. Hegel here is referring to thought. More specifically, he's referring to the collected, accumulative thought of the species. The thought that is built up over ages and ages, the development of knowledge, the transmission of knowledge that has been passed down to us, that stands above us, a knowledge that we must study to learn, a knowledge that we are not born with inherently, but a knowledge that we must apply ourselves in discipline to grasp. So he says that religion must at the same time recollect that it is dealing with the heart of a spirit. But this refers to the heart of collective consciousness, a transcendence that is higher than religion itself. This rebirth, says Hegel, of the spirit out of the natural lack of knowledge and equally out of natural error happens through instruction and through faith in the objective truth. The faith in the content that arises from the witness of the Spirit. What does that mean? The faith in the content that arises from the witness of the Spirit. Again, Hegel is not here speaking of a mystery. He's not speaking of mysticism. He's speaking of a very concrete process. This is why he says that this transformation, this rebirth, happens through instruction and through faith in objective truth, meaning that we believe that the collective knowledge of humans has gathered and accumulated in something higher than our own subjectivity. The faith in the content that arises from the witness of the Spirit. The faith is not in a mysterious phantom. The faith here is in the content that arises from the study, from immersing ourselves within the history of human knowledge, from partaking of the development of human culture. He says, this rebirth of the spirit is also an immediate rebirth of the heart, among other things, out of the vanity of the one-sided understanding which leads it to boast of its knowledge, of such assumptions as the diversity of the finite form from the infinite. What Hegel is referring to here is the fact that this immediate rebirth of the heart, it pulls one out of the vanity of the one-sided understanding of the religious form that thinks it has a monopoly on understanding the world, on understanding truth, that it thinks it has a monopoly on knowledge itself. This rebirth pulls us out of the lie of this arrogance, the lie of this self-delusion, the lie of this cultural delusion. This rebirth of the spirit is also an immediate rebirth of the heart. It affects not just the mind, but the heart. It's a rebirth out of the vanity of the one-sided understanding. This is a reference to dialectical consciousness, where human rationality expands into totality. This one-sided understanding which leads it to boast of its knowledge of such assumptions as the diversity of the finite from the infinite. It thinks that in merely dividing itself within its own narrow category, that it has grasped the totality of human knowledge, the totality of reality. And Hegel comes along and says that religion must be reborn from this error, from this lie, from this lack of knowledge. That the religious mind must be reborn into a dialectical consciousness. It is a rebirth that liberates us from such lamentable insights as those insights that enable pious humility to ride its high horse over both philosophy and theological cognition alike. What Hegel is doing is, again, attacking this pious form of religion. This form of religion that retreats into its feelings, that retreats into its psychological world of comfort. Hegel is calling this religion to a higher task, to a higher form, to a higher purpose that will expand it beyond its one-sided monological form. He's calling it to a dialectical consciousness that will emancipate it from itself. When the religious attitude abides, by its intense feeling without any exposition, and hence without any spirit, it does, of course, only know of the opposition between its narrowed and narrowing form of mind and the spiritual expansion of doctrine, whether religious as such or philosophical. That is to say, that when the religious attitude or form abides by its intense feeling without expanding itself, without going beyond this mode of intuition, without going beyond this philosophy of feeling, this philosophy of piousness, then it finds itself locked within itself. It finds itself incapable of going beyond its own assumptions. However, says Hegel, the thinking spirit does not just restrict itself to finding its satisfaction. Very important quote. The thinking spirit. That means the world spirit of history, the development and march of collective consciousness that we begin to partake of when we become aware of this mighty river that flows to us from the past. When we become aware of this, the thinking spirit does not just restrict itself to finding its satisfaction. It doesn't merely content itself with achieving a notion of psychological comfort, but it proceeds beyond this point. And this is of the nature of this world spirit. What does that mean? It's of its nature. The knowledge that comes to us, that's been transmitted to us through the progress of culture as it's drove on through history, this is a progressive spirit. It's not a consciousness that merely remains stagnant, and if we are to be partakers of it, we cannot engage in a cultural piety. We cannot engage in a monological piety wherein we merely psychologically content ourselves with a creed of knowledge, with a creed of what the world is. But we continue to drive on and press forward beyond this psychological comfort. Hegel says the thinking spirit does not just restrict itself to finding its satisfaction in the pure, the simple-hearted religious attitude. He's referring to this in derogatory terms. The simple-minded, simple-hearted religious attitude. On the contrary, that standpoint is itself a result which has emerged from reflection and argument. So Hegel is noting that even at the base of piety, there has been subconsciously formed a process of reflection and argumentation that led it to this stance of piety, meaning that it has a performative contradiction built into it, which negates its own form. Hegel says, it is by the aid of the superficial understanding that the religious attitude has given itself this fine liberation from virtually all doctrines. It is by the aid of the superficial understanding, a derogatory term, that religion is engaged in superficial understanding. That this act of religion this act of pious religion is itself a process of superficial understanding, an attitude that it has given itself this fine liberation from virtually all doctrines, meaning that it separates itself from anything that is contrary to it. It retreats back into itself. And it is by using the thinking with which it is infected for its zealous attack on philosophy that it maintains itself by force on the rarefied peak of an abstract state of feeling without any content. Without any content. Hegel is referring here to a psychological process that occurs within religion, a process of dogmatism. A process which locks the disciple of religion into a cage of dogmatism. This is why he says, it is by using the thinking with which it is infected for its zealous attack on philosophy, meaning it tries to poison the well against the act of philosophy from the very outset, so it can retreat into itself, into its creed. That it maintains itself by force on the rarefied peak of an abstract state of feeling, not of knowledge, not of reason, not of rationality, that has no content. It is simply a shallow superficial form. He says, I cannot refrain from citing here some experts from the exhortation of Franz von Baader about a configuration of piety of that kind in the 5th volume of his Fermentia Cognitions. Franz von Baader was a very famous thinker in Hegel's time. You can look him up if you would like. He says, for as long as religion and its doctrines have not regained in the eyes of science a respect that is grounded upon free research and hence upon genuine convictions, for so long all of you, the pious and the impious, with all of your do's and don'ts, and all your talk and action, will have no remedy against evil, and for so long will this unrespected religion not be loved, because only what is seen to be sincerely respected and recognized to be indubitably worthy of respect can be wholeheartedly and sincerely loved. Just as religion can only be served with a generous love of the same kind. In other words, if you want the practice of religion to flourish again, says Baader, then you must make sure that we achieve a rational theory of it once more, and not leave your enemies, the atheists, in complete possession of the field with their irrational and blasphemous assertion that no such theory of religion is to be thought of at all, that such a thing is impossible because religion is a matter of the heart only, a region where one quite conveniently can, and indeed one must, divest oneself of one's head. Here we have the early stages of apologetics showing itself in Germany. So this critique by Baader against religion is a charge against piety, against retreating into a world of creedal feelings. And he makes a charge against atheists here, saying that if religion does not rise to the occasion and begin to think and demonstrate that it has a rationality to it, then these religionists will prove that atheism is true, that what the atheists say about it is correct. Well, what does Hegel say? Hegel said that it is necessary for religion to be born again. And that is the point that Hegel is trying to drive home here. That religion must be born again. It must transcend this position of mere feeling and intuition, this disposition of piety, this disposition of merely taking the understanding to comprise totality. Religion must be born again into a dialectical consciousness. Hegel says, regarding poverty of content, we can remark further that this can only be talked of as the way in which the external state of religion appears at a particular time. A time of that kind may be lamented because such an effort is needed just to bring forth the mere faith in God. And Hegel here is correct. To bring forth the faith in God, it is indeed required that culture has some type of feeling aspect, some type of piety that pushes it in that direction. Now, Hegel is viewing religion through a dialectical lens. So he doesn't necessarily see this idea of faith as separated from the totality of the development of human knowledge, but that faith and belief in God and religions have all played their part in the totality and the development of the world's spirit. Hegel says, a need that weighed so heavy on the noble Jacobi and further to awaken only a concentrated Christianity of feeling. All the same, we cannot fail to recognize the higher principles that announce themselves even here. But what lies before science, says Hegel, is the rich content that hundreds and thousands of years of cognitive activity have brought forth for itself. Hundreds and thousands of years of cognitive activity have brought forth for itself. And this content does not lie before it as historical information that only others possess. So this is Hegel's magnificent humanist idea, that we are part of a historical line of consciousness that goes back down the chain of the development of our species. That the thoughts we have were themselves generated going further and further back. We walked up, as it were, a kind of conceptual flight of stairs. Hegel says, this is for us to possess now. This is not just something we view in the past that is dead and gone, that we look at as a relic, but it's something that we possess even now. He says if we didn't possess it, then it would be something dead and gone for us, just as an occupation to exercise our memories and our acuteness in the critical evaluation of reports, not a topic for the cognition of the spirit and the rational concern with truth. What is most sublime, most profound, and most inward has been called forth into the light of day in the religions, philosophies, and works of art, and more or less pure and clear are more obscure shapes, often in very repulsive ones. We can count it as a particular merit of Franz von Bader that he not only goes on bringing such forms to our recollection, but also with a profoundly speculative spirit, he brings their basic import expressly into scientific honor. Now we are talking about secularism and humanism, the expansion of knowledge, the sublation of the historical forms of knowledge, the sublation of the world spirit to finding its way into the domain, into the project of humanism. He says, because on that basis, he expounds and confirms the philosophical idea. Very important, not the religious idea. What is the culmination of this thousands of years? Not the religious idea in Hegel. The culmination of thousands of years of this collective thought in humans, says Hegel, which was captured by Franz von Bader, is that it expounds and confirms the philosophical idea. Now that is truly exceptional. Hegel did not say it expounds and confirms religion. He said that it expounds and confirms philosophy. That philosophy is not only the sublated form of religion, the emancipatory form of religion, it's also the form that religion must be born into. Religion must be born again in the sense that it approaches its own contents through the eyes of philosophy. That it begins to use the advance of this world spirit to see itself more clearly, to understand the primitive foundation of its own forms and how those forms relate to secular contents of knowledge. What an extraordinary thing that we have at the beginning of Christianity, the claim from Jesus that a man must be born again in order to enter the kingdom of heaven. But we have in the development of the world spirit the necessity of this very religion that once claimed, or once was perhaps, an emancipation of the human away from a lesser form. We have the necessity of the transcendence of this form. That this form, which once claimed to be the object of rebirth, has now become the subject of rebirth. That this form was not complete in itself, So philosophy teaches us. But this form must be reborn again in light of the philosophical. That this form must come to understand itself through an expanded consciousness, through a collective consciousness of the development of world spirit. Because only then can it see itself within its actual material context in history. And only when it can see itself within this material context can it begin to contextualize itself. Religion was not the accumulation of the development of this world spirit, which is still developing even now in our time and will continue to develop beyond our time. But philosophical consciousness was the highest point yet achieved within the development of this world spirit. It is the emancipatory point. It is the point of freedom, which is precisely why religion cannot remain within the delusion and bondage of its contents if it cares to be brought into a state of freedom. If it cares to be free, then it has no choice but to take upon it the authority of the philosophical form.